Hello, good afternoon. Today our guest is Professor Peter Lindert. Hello, Professor Peter. How are you doing?
Okay.
I am great. So, Peter, you are an expert in the arena of income inequality, but today we'll be talking about your latest book, Making Social Spending Work.
Mhm.
What motivated you to pen that book, Peter?
I have long been interested in the political controversy over government social spending, meaning public education, public health, public pensions, housing, things like that. It's always struck me that there's a lot of imagination and controversy about them, both for people who favor them and for people who oppose. But I'm an economic historian who likes to do things empirically, just look at, hey, what do the actual historical experiences tell us? And that got me into it. And I've been on this topic for some time. I find it fascinating and politically very important.
And Peter, some years ago, you wrote a book arguing that welfare does not deter economic growth. It is it is popularly posited that welfare has the potential to deter economic growth, and it also reduces the incentive to save and invest. But some time ago, you produced contradictory data. Would you like to tell us about your prior research on the topic?
Sure. 17 years ago, I brought together a number of writings into the book called Growing Public, which was a history of social spending since the late 18th century. And in that book, I basically did the following sort of thing. Let's put on the table all the arguments pro and con, but then let's see what actually seems to be the difference in economic growth and well-being in countries that spend a lot on this sort of thing and countries that spend very little on this sort of thing. What are the differences? And just empirically, it turns out that there's no clear negative effect of the larger social spending budgets, think Western Europe, for example, on economic growth or on the growth or the level of GDP. So it's not that I found that there was a great positive effect of the entire package, but it's just a real world comparison of what people do in different countries. And it comes out that it's not negative, that the extra spending that they do for the sake of helping the poor, the sick, and the elderly, it does not cost in terms of GDP growth. That's what I said 17 years ago. Now, the current book from 2021 called Making Social Spending Work uses a lot more data for these last 17 to 20 years. And it also covers more parts of the world than the old book did. The old book was our classic old countries. Hey, let's talk about the North Atlantic community. The new book covers most of the world. Okay.
All right then. So you're finished talking about that topic. So Peter, when will government spending deter growth? Because some studies have discovered a negative relationship between government spending and economic growth. So what is the nature of government spending when it is deterring economic growth?
Well, first of all, of course, I challenge those who say they found a negative relationship. Rather, they chose to imagine a negative relationship. They had a theory, which serves the interests of some people very well, that no taxes should be spent on this sort of thing. And they went and tried to describe a world where that would be true. But frankly, I'm calling their bluff on that. There was a lot of fiction in that. It was not based on a real reading of all of the historical experience. So you ask, your question said, are there cases where it could be negative for economic growth, in cases where it is not? There are cases where it could be, hypothetically. And even in actual fact, if you looked at particular parts of the social spending big package, you could find some for which the economists have found a negative effect on work incentives and growth. Those parts which do have such a negative effect are unemployment compensation and certain bad designs, not any design, but certain bad designs for anti-poverty welfare assistance. There are cases where there is this negative effect, but they are outweighed by the positive effect of other kinds of social spending, especially public education and public health insurance. Those are so clearly good for economic growth and life expectancy that it outweighs the negative effects that the economists have found for, say, unemployment insurance.
Okay, then. So are you saying that the productivity depleting effects of welfare are lower than its productivity enhancing effects in the long term? And by productivity enhancing effects, I'm referring to education and healthcare, because investment in education and healthcare will make us more productive.
Yes, you said it correctly.
But Peter, there's also another pressing issue. The idea of crowding out and the
I'm
government,
sorry,
well,
the idea of,
the idea of crowding out, the impact of government welfare on private welfare.
crowding out, sorry, yeah. Mhm,
Can private welfare crowd out government welfare?
mhm.
Yes or no?
No, that is seriously overrated. There's various kinds of crowding out that are invented by conservatives who basically want to come up with arguments that keep taxes low and the government small. They do not work out, in fact, very well. For example, regarding welfare, suppose you said, oh, well, if you have the government helping the poor with food stamps and things like that, that's just crowding out the private charity. Well, absolutely, that is not correct. And I call the bluff of anybody who claims that that's true. We have a lot of history of when and how much private individuals give to charity to help out the poor, and it's just not there. They give tiny amounts, basically just the smallest little amount, so that you can say, oh, I gave, but really you're giving pennies, you're giving nothing. It was never true that poverty was substantially cured by private charity in this country or in any country, period.
All right. There's an article titled Does welfare spending crowd out charitable activity, evident from historical England under the poor laws? And I will read the abstract. Well, just a part of the abstract.
The
We find
author is, sorry, the author.
Paul Sharp,
Paul Sharp.
Nina Buberg Fazlik. I don't like to mispronounce people's name, so
Yeah.
that's why I didn't cite her. But Paul Sharp, I'm more familiar with the work of Paul Sharp.
Mhm.
And they write, using data on poor relief spending combined with data on charitable incomes by country before and after 1800, we find a positive relationship. Areas with more public provision also enjoyed higher levels of charitable income.
Okay, and that was a positive relationship, not crowding out. It was the opposite of
Yes.
crowding out is what they found.
Yes.
I think I want to go look back at that article again. Certainly in terms of just the broad sweep of time and space, that's true. And it's true that wherever the government gives more to the poor, private give more to the poor as well. In countries like ours, there's an actual mechanism that makes the two go together. Charitable deductions, when you itemize your income tax deductions, so that if you are really a high income person, the government is, society is allowing you to put onto them much of the burden of your charity, because you get to write it off and you pay lower taxes by giving charity. But that only happens in countries where the taxes that you would get out of are big and where the actual government spending is big. So that sounds like what you just reported from Paul Sharp and others. Again, it's not crowding out, it's the opposite.
Exactly. David Beto, he's a well-known historian. He has written many books on the role of private charity in reducing poverty. And some like Beto have argued that private charities are more efficient at providing social services, because if the service is public, obviously it is provided by government. So Peter, are private charities more effective at producing social services?
No, they are not. Especially they are not more effective than broad universal government programs which cover all of the poor. Those government programs have very low administrative costs. The bureaucratic cost of the private ones is often as high. I'll give you an example. In the early modern period, like 16th to 18th century, when they were first experimenting with poor relief policy, many countries had just local religious institutions provide for the charity. But they also, at the time, wanted to be very tough on monitoring the poor, making sure that none of them, got away with an easy life, so that you would not take this charity unless you had to. Well, that kind of private or local charities, local governments kind of spending, in fact, has high administrative bureaucratic costs, because like in Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist, Mr. Bumble is there to kind of keep track on what everybody does, and paying this administrative cost is about 1/4 of the entire budget. The rest, so that part doesn't even go to the poor. No, if you really wanted to help people's poverty, it's more efficient to have a broad system where anybody qualifies, and there's a minimum of administrative cost.
All right then. So again, you're calling bluff on the argument that private charities are more effective at reducing poverty and providing social services than the government. But there's another argument, Peter.
Mhm.
Some contend that government bureaucrats are faceless, and when people receive benefits from the church or other NGOs, they must comply with certain requirements, and as such, private charities are more effective than government welfare. Do you buy this argument?
More effective at what? They might be
At
more
at
effective at
providing
monitoring
Yeah,
the poor.
these charities are more effective at monitoring the poor. And because people are likely to comply with the requirements, there's a higher likelihood that poverty will be reduced and these individuals will improve themselves.
Not true. It's not true as a general result. And Britain tried this way back in 1834. They thought that that would work. It did not get more people out of poverty. And those were kind of like fictitious anecdotes that they even told at the time. Oh, I'm so grateful to you for cutting off my poor relief and government support, because I've now shaped up and I've got my life together. That's fiction. That's fiction. If you want to say that that's the way the general result works, it's not true. It does not work that way. But basically, in most cases, as the late Charles Kindleberger, a famous economic historian, has said, most of the time, a kick in the pants of that sort doesn't galvanize, it just hurts. Basically, you are denying assistance to more people than any subset that sort of wake up the morning after and decide they're going to behave better. That is an anecdote that does not fit the overall facts.
What are the downsides to government spending?
Well, it can be done badly. It is done badly in places, well, let's say, where the government is simply a corrupt skimmer, say the old Marcos regime in the Philippines, or Mobutu in Congo. there's famous cases where government behaves badly, but that's not the reality of, say, Sweden or Denmark today. Some countries like this, they don't behave this way. In fact, what you actually get is the opposite result. If you look at the countries with the highest social spending, as my book says, those are the governments that have the best ratings internationally by businessmen for being clean government, that you don't have to bribe and, and get a hassle with, et cetera. All the Nordic countries, Switzerland, some others, those are cleaner governments. They get better ratings than does the government of the United States even. So it's not the case that the countries that are spending a lot on social insurance, making people, get up out of poverty, are corrupt and are the wasteful ones. The wasteful ones are others.
And Scandinavia, this is quite an interesting case study. Some time ago I was reading an academic article, and the article cited a study saying that people in Scandinavia are actually in favor of government welfare because they're individualistic and value autonomy. Government welfare prevents them from the indignity of depending on their neighbor. That was the conclusion of the academic article.
I don't know that specific article, but that's a reasonable point. You see, it's a point about how people feel and how they say in interviews they feel. And yeah, we're getting that result. They feel dignified, they feel happy. These overall happiness ratings, as well as trust in government ratings, are the highest for those countries with those high budgets.
They have different institutions and culture, but Professor Lindert, you said that when government programs are designed badly, they will fail. This is quite obvious. Could you give some examples of American welfare programs that are not designed properly?
Yes, in the book, I noted twice that we got a situation where they got the specifics of the welfare incentives wrong, because they would give you the support up to a certain threshold and then just cut it off fast at that threshold. That happened twice in our history with opposite political motivations. First, in the late 1960s, it got to be the case that in the Great Society programs, they gave you support, again, only up to a certain point, but then when it was found that you had certain income, they threw you out. That means an enormously high tax rate on that extra income. So your incentive to get that extra income was low. We improved on that. Both Milton Friedman on the right, James Tobin on the left, got the Nixon administration to adjust that and to improve things so that there's a more gradual relationship between your low income and the amount of support you got from government. And with that more gradual relationship, you got lower tax rates at the margin, like only 1/3 or so. Then we fell back again. Reagan in 1981 went in the wrong direction again, because he basically had policy be shaped by anecdotes saying, oh, I found somebody whose income was actually a little bit above the poverty line, and we were still giving them anti-poverty support. Well, we have to stop that. And they really clamped down on it. So again, the effect was that if you not only had a job, but you earned a little bit more, they would slash all your support. It's a huge tax rate on that extra income, if you get that idea. The marginal income pays a huge, enormous tax. Reagan got that wrong, and they had to back away from that. Since then, we've done much better. Since 1993, with the earned income tax credit, we've done a much better job of making sure that you have tax incentives to get a job, and you will continue to get some relief up to a certain point until you're really secure in your job and you've been at it for a long time, and then you join the ranks of general taxpayers.
The earned income tax credit. More than likely, you're familiar with a study by Henrik Cleven. He's a foreign academic who lives and works in America, and he was arguing that the EITC is actually quite ineffective. Are you familiar with that study?
He has a co-author, right? This is Cleveland and who?
Yes, he has a co-author, but I'm more familiar with his work.
He was, now there's that study, if it's the one I'm thinking of, that study is excellent. And it does a very good job of going after specific margins of US policy practice on taxes and spending. And it finds ones for which things work well or work badly. It's not that it showed that the entire EITC, Earned Income Tax Credit, is a bad idea, that it somehow discourages work or costs too much. Didn't find that. He found that at certain margins, I could look it up for you, about like hours worked versus number of years at work versus your overall earnings level. They found certain margins at which it was not getting a good rate of return, but others at which it was doing well.
And how do you suggest we improve it? Because you're big on suggestions.
Yeah. How do I improve which? EITC?
Yes, you're very big on suggestions.
EITC does not need an overhaul. I won't give you a huge suggestion yet. I could come back in separate correspondence with you to say which specific margin Hendrik Van Cleven and others were talking about. That's not the worst of policies. That's doing fine. And in fact, the US practice on that since 1993 was imitated elsewhere. Britain did the same sort of thing around the year 2000, and other countries have also set up work subsidies, work incentive programs like ours. The whole thing can't be a silver bullet for everybody, right? Because if it gives you a subsidy it tells you, oh, you've got some extra earnings, we like that, we're going to give you this extra, government tax rebate. That can't go on forever. At some point, as your earnings get very high up into the middle of society's ranks, we have to stop the subsidy. And there will be some point at which you will pay extra taxes. But the whole program has been shown by Hillary Hoynes and others to have had a favorable effect on people's getting and keeping careers.
Yes. So and again, on this show, when I interview academics, I listen to their ideas and I share some criticisms. Now, this is not real. This is an academic study, but produced by the United States Senate. It's an academic report, and the Foundation for Economic Education is a libertarian think tank, and the FEE published an article titled "New Report Shows Growth of the Welfare State Has Fueled Long-Term Declines in the Labor Force," published by JEC, the Senate Joint Economic Committee, the Senate Joint Economic Committee on the Republican side. And it writes, the US has witnessed an unprecedented rise in disconnected prime age workers over time. As shown in the graph below, the men's labor force participation rate has fallen from more than 97% in 1955 to 89% prior to the pandemic, while the women's labor force participation rate has declined in recent decades as well. And the study looked at immigration and technological advancement and suggested, according to the writer, Mr. Brad Palumbo, he's citing the actual data from the study. They write, many would-be workers are voluntarily disconnected from work, and government programs and policies have likely made work less attractive for these Americans. And this study is quite recent, 2020. So again, Professor Lindert, it's quite difficult to get rid of the argument that welfare is not sapping productivity. It's the most popular trope on the right.
It's wrong. The trope is wrong. That specific study, I would have to look at exactly what they were said they were getting. Now, you notice that the statement is coming to you from the Foundation for Economic Education, the libertarian think tank. That's who's giving us this result. Well, they wanted that. They would shop for anything and bend anything they could to get that kind of result. It's not true. It's a bluff. In terms of labor force participation, I'm sorry, but over our entire lifetimes, even over mine, there's been this steady upward march in women's labor force participation. Men's has not declined that much. And after the year 2000, any easing off of men's labor force participation, say in the age group 55 to 64, for which there was some easing off, that got reversed, and they continue to work a lot. Now, more broadly, internationally, I have the same challenge to throw back. Show me that the countries where the social spending and the supports are higher are countries where people work less. Not true. The Scandinavians and others work as much as anybody else. If there's a division between countries that work more and work less, it's not according to how much social spending they have. So that is what you're quoting, a biased statement from that foundation. I don't think it's true as a generalization.
Well, that's okay. But Lindbeck's position on welfare is quite balanced. But in his assessment of Scandinavia, he actually argued that welfare can have a negative impact on work. But these studies are pretty old, approaching around 20.
You're talking about Lindbeck when he was writing in the early 1990s?
No, Lindbeck did some studies around that time, and he also did some more recent studies, but nothing as recent as 2017, 2018 on the topic that I have seen.
I've been in touch with Asar on this, and we've corresponded. I do not get that general result from him. If we go back from him or his work. Oh, he's one thing he's quite famous for about this is not specifically about the welfare state. It's about employee protection laws in Spain, Italy, places like that. And those laws have had the damaging effect of creating insiders and outsiders. Think of Spain, for example, as he would. And those are particularly bad laws, but those are not the welfare spending. Those are not the social spending. Asar, by the way, is somebody I admire. His work back in the early 1990s, he did a great job of coming up with that economic reform commission for Sweden that did improve Sweden's policies in many respects. And Sweden has been performing much better ever since.
Professor Lindert, is there a relationship between welfare and morality? Again, this is another argument that is often thrown around in the public's realm, that welfare can alter our moral perceptions. Based on your reading of the data and academic research, what have you discovered?
Academic research about morality
and welfare, yes.
Would you want to say how you are measuring morality?
Yes, some do argue that welfare had a negative impact on our moral perceptions.
Yeah, well, they wanted to, didn't they? They wanted you to believe that. But I would have to hear how you were defining moral perceptions, etc. The welfare, though, it is not true that there is, what do we want for morality here? A measure of morality, sort of like violence against others, crime. It's simply not true that the high spending welfare states have more of that.
Yeah, so if you, well, one thing I like about your research, Peter, is that I call you a mythbuster. You and Jeffrey Williams are mythbusters, especially on your work on globalization. So listen to someone like yourself, they would automatically, obviously not people like you, but individuals would tend to think and speak glibly. So if one is arguing that welfare is not detrimental to growth, it does not logically follow that he will also argue that globalization is bad for growth. The two issues do not comport. They don't.
They don't.
Exactly.
They are different issues.
Yes, exactly. But you're an intelligent person, so you're going to notice that. But some listening will say, okay, Peter is a leftist, but unfortunately for them, they don't know about your work on globalization. Tell us
Well,
about it.
if they say I'm a leftist, by the way, let me send back the message to any such people. I am a militant empiricist.
Exactly.
I'm a militant empiricist, as you say, a myth buster. So I could be in one camp or the other, depending on what the facts told me. So if you wish, I mean, and by the way, the books of mine that you're talking about now did get favorable reception by many progressives. They like the results. That's their business if they like the results. Let's go back to another setting, which I think illustrates what you are saying about Jeffries and my work. Back in much earlier times, we found that it was not true that in the Industrial Revolution era, workers' living standards all declined. And he and I took a lot of heat from the left for saying that. All I can say is we're showing you the data, and whichever way the data fall, I will go. If it's an important question, I will say what the data show.
Exactly. And then I read one of your other articles. I read one of one of your articles on globalization and income inequality, and you said that countries that adjusted to globalization, they actually grew wealthier.
Yes. Think China.
Yes,
China globalized, and and other countries that stayed shut out from the global economy did much worse.
And David Dollar, he also has a paper on the topic, and this is one of the reasons why recent polls have shown that in Asian countries, people are supportive of free market because they benefited from free market. And I live in Jamaica, a small country, and according to the data, small countries disproportionately benefit from free trade. Countries that engage in protectionism, they do not end up wealthy.
Yes.
Not at all.
That's right. That's
even
right.
even when we're talking about Africa, the great empires of Africa like Mali and Axum were trading empires. Trading is crucial to development. It's not a silver bullet, but locking yourself away from other people will not make you rich.
Correct.
And
that's the finding.
And neither will it ameliorate income inequality.
That's in practice. I think what you just said was true, if I understood you. You can shut yourself off from the rest of the world, but that does not necessarily give you greater equality. Correct, because it depends on how you got shut off from the rest of the world and who did the shutting off. It could simply be that the poor in your country are all the more dependent on the autocrats that shut them off from the rest of the world.
Yes, and when you're not integrated in the world, you don't benefit from technology transfer. We don't live in isolation. When a product is developed in Japan, China, or America, countries in the third world, provided that they have the right institution and skills, can benefit from second or third mover advantage.
Yeah.
But going back to your work on making social spending work, tell us a little about pension systems.
Pension systems. There's like any other policy, there's sort of theoretical arguments for and against them. The argument for them was, well, people might outlive their savings and there needs to be a safety net for the elderly. That I think is not the top priority for any social spending. It's all right to have a safety net for the elderly, just as you have for other people. But in practice, in my book, what I find is that many countries, especially in the global South, they overdo it. Basically, their social spending is tilted too much toward helping the elderly, especially the elderly who had previously had privileged occupations, like government service, for example, that they were over compensated by the rest of society. And the money that was given to them could also have been given to a much better form of social spending, which is, for example, better primary education and more universal primary education. That's where the money could have gone, with a better payoff to all of society, except for the special groups.
All right then, because I am yet to read your book, but I was looking at some reviews, and for the most part, the reviews that have been positive, but they know that in relation to pension systems, you're a bit critical.
Critical relative, yeah, specific ones. Now, it's not that you should not run the headline, Lindert critical of public pensions. Which public pensions? It's badly run in, say, Brazil or Turkey, and badly run in some of the European countries of the Mediterranean. But others do a much better job. Sweden, New Zealand, many other countries like that do an excellent job, and they are not in trouble. By the way, the United States pension system is not in trouble. We are a little bit generous toward the elderly when we should be investing more in children under the age of 6. We are guilty of that relative to other countries, but basically our pensions system, our Social Security system, is solvent. It's not going to go bankrupt. Whenever you see such a headline, that seems to be incorrect.
All right. So we're on, you are a myth buster. So I'm going to, well, I don't play devil's advocate. I identify as a libertarian, but on this show, I don't talk about my politics or my own views only when necessary. But there's another myth that you might like to bust. And this is from Credit Suisse, and Credit Suisse writes, strong social security programs can greatly reduce the need for personal financial assets. This is one explanation for the high level of wealth inequality we identify in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The top groups continue to accumulate for business and investment purposes. So the argument essentially is that government welfare is crowding out private investment, and by private, I'm literally referring to a person or a group of individuals. What do you think about this position? I'm not asking to critique the efficacy of the study done by Credit Suisse, because I don't know if you read it, but what do you think about this position more broadly?
One thing about the Credit Suisse study, as you have quoted it, notice they say it can, it might. Oh, that's hypothetical. It could. They didn't show you evidence that it does. This kind of statement belongs in there in the debate as something to be tested with the facts. And that's what my book has been doing with the results that you have already referred to. Let me give a side comment on they're slipping in the note of high wealth inequality in Denmark, Sweden, etc. That's not really correct. It's certainly misleading. Wealth inequality, as they are measuring it, is only strictly private wealth in a very narrow form. It's something far narrower than the resources you have over your lifetime. The resources you have over your lifetime include all sorts of other human capital and wealth, like your skills. And it also, these resources that you have over your whole lifetime include your entitlements, may I use that word, entitlements to health insurance and old age insurance, etc. So in Denmark and Sweden, those things are not unequal. When you get a broader concept of what a person has over their entire lifetime, the equality is still there.
All right. So you have again destroyed another myth. That's why I call you and Jeffrey Williams mythbusters. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe earlier in the discussion you mentioned it a bit, but now we're going to talk about unemployment insurance. What are your thoughts?
Unemployment insurance is something that could work sort of well if all you wanted to know about unemployment insurance is not how it helps people out in a crisis, but if all you wanted to know was, does it affect their incentive to take a new job when a new job is available? That's a classic, particular focus of conservatives against it. The criticisms are often correct. that it will make you less likely to take a new job if you're being told, oh, here, please stay unemployed, we'll give you plenty of support. That's the common sort of anecdotal idea. Now, let's talk about the years 2020 and 2021 and unemployment insurance. That's going to be an interesting thing. It's going to be really interesting to see how the data work out. So far, we can, from the public debate and the news coverage of unemployment insurance this year and these last 2 years, it is one of 4 candidates for why people were somewhat slower to take new jobs. So if a sort of conservative critics wanted to say, oh, in 2020, we gave people this generous unemployment compensation, and that's going to make them slower to take a new job. Yes, that's one of the 4 factors that I will list here. It probably did so. A second one, many of those people in the COVID crisis were over age of 55, and they just decided, by the time this crisis is over, I'm going to be out of here anyway. I'll just retire early and not take the short, temporary, low-paying job now. So it's an early retirement thing in addition to the unemployment compensation. A third one is people are frankly simply afraid of the workplace lately because of COVID. And finally, many people have difficulties in continuing in the workplace because of the childcare issue when the schools have been so intermittently available. So all of those things are out there. The unemployment insurance jumped in 2020. Notice who made it jump. Every voting member of Congress in both houses, both Republicans and Democrats, voted in favor of this jump in the social spending and the unemployment compensation. President Trump signed it immediately. With what result? Well, for one thing, the recovery did begin. That's a positive result to put against the negative result that maybe some people are still slower because of it to take a new job. Another positive result, is this really bad for business? Let's see. As soon as they passed that CARES Act in March, April of 2020, the stock market has jumped and it's been happy ever since. So if you're a person who says the effects of a jump in social spending has to be disastrous, these are hard times for you.
Well, as I said earlier, I am a libertarian, but specifically in relation to the issue of welfare, I have been greeted with many anecdotal studies and empirical studies with anecdotal information, but I have never read a large study arguing that welfare will deter one's interest in work. Maybe they exist, but I am unaware. But most of the data that I have contended, the studies are quite anecdotal.
Well, I cite, if you wish, I cite in the book the negative income tax experiments of the 1970s and others that show, even statistically, there are ways in which, there are contexts in which people are slower to take another job if they have the unemployment compensation. Don't dismiss that idea altogether. It's true. It's just that as a part of the grade that you give to the large government social budgets in certain countries, it's just a small part of the grade. They do many other things that work so well. Basically, a problem with much of the anecdotal evidence is that it wants to imagine that governments do something stupid. Private business would never do anything stupid. Governments do something stupid. But when you look at the actual practice, they're not that dumb. They don't just say, oh, you want to drop out of school? Well, here's a nice income forever if you want to just sit on the street and play your guitar. There is no government in the world that does that.
All right. Now we're on the issue of busting myths, because this is something that we like to do. The problem of the minimum wage is not crucial to our conversation, but tell us about the minimum wage.
The minimum wage issue, as you say, is separate from social spending, so it's not something that I wrote about. The minimum wage issue depends on how much minimum wage you're talking about. Obviously, if you were to pass a law that says, oh, everybody must be paid a minimum wage of $100 an hour, that would have an effect. That could be pretty bad. That could be really stupid. So society had better shy away from such excessively generous minimum wage increases. Society has typically done so. So if you really look at, say, in the United States, which is I think what you're asking about, the minimum wage has always kind of crept up slowly, and it's always well below the average wage being paid. So, and even in, say, cities or states which have high minimum wages, like, you know, the ones that were first to give you $15 an hour, those are places, say, you know, say Seattle, where you're already being paid more than that in the market because McDonald's and others have to pay you more to get your labor. Labor is simply scarce. And so that the raising of the minimum wage, it might benefit some people by curbing the behavior of excessively cheap employers, but it really doesn't have that much effect yet. And that's probably a good thing. As I say, I wouldn't want to say, oh, we need to raise the minimum wage to say $100 an hour.
Well, according to David Newmark, he did a study, and I remember it quite well. And he said that on average, it appears that raising the minimum wage is likely to have a negative effect than a positive effect.
And others say the opposite. So that was David Newmark, but then of course
David Card and other people.
David Card would be different.
Yes, he's the opposite.
Yeah, he'd be the opposite, right? So let them go ahead and have that battle. I am not somebody who took sides in that battle.
Okay.
It's not what I'm writing about. And frankly, I didn't write about it in part because the issue of the impacts of the minimum wage call for some really deep econometrics,
yes,
which I could not do alone.
You couldn't do it alone. I do agree. I was speaking to a libertarian economist, and he also expressed your opinions that studying the long-term effects of the minimum wage is quite complicated. But you're up to it. You and Jeffrey are both up to it.
Econometric studies, we're not the right people to turn to. I thank you for the positive comment, but no, we are not deep econometricians.
Yes. So this will be our last topic. The matter of subsidies. Again, another popular leitmotif on the libertarian right and even on the left. Subsidies are bad for growth. Subsidies negatively affect unemployment. I'm going to give you my own view on subsidies soon. Well, as a libertarian, my view is quite simple. I don't support rent-seeking or government bailout of businesses, but I don't believe that Americans are analyzing the issue of subsidies properly because I live in Jamaica. And what's interesting about Jamaica is that UA, the University of the West Indies, is subsidized by the government. So there's a UA in Jamaica, a UA in Trinidad, and a UA in Barbados. I went to the University of the West Indies. I did not take out a loan. The fee was less than $300,000 a year. And at the time, that was around, let's say, around $2,000 US or over 1,000 US a year. I don't remember the exact figure. But the fees in America are expensive. If I were to study in America, I would have taken out a loan. So, but when I do research on America, I get the impression that the subsidies in higher education are failing because they create perverse incentives. So in Jamaica, education is subsidized, but there are no regulations saying that you need to do A, B, C, and D to get the subsidy. You don't need to prove that you're starving to get the subsidy. You don't need to build a new department or hire X amount of people. The subsidy is basically a grant, whereas in America, the incentives are a bit different. What do you think?
Wow, you put many things on the table at once there. So many lumps there, I can hardly get a tablecloth over them. I would say that You're referring to subsidies to higher education.
Yeah, specifically
And
higher
at some point you
education.
talked about loans as well. Um,
Like if I were studying in America, I would have taken out a loan because higher education in America is just expensive.
yeah, sure. The the clearest positive payoffs historically from governments paying for education have come at the primary education level all over the world. And there is not a single country that has successfully uh, achieved modern standards of universal education by doing it privately. Nope, everybody has this primarily as government financed. Government financed, it would be a separate topic as to whether the government should run the schools or not, and that's a separate topic. But government finance, primary, high rate of return. Now, what about higher education? Higher education also has a good rate of return overall. I don't like the way it's done. The public subsidies to higher education are done in all countries. I'm very happy with, in the United States context, let's say, of expanding the Pell grants. Those are fine, somewhat needs-based grants for higher education. But I do not see a strong case for sort of having the taxpayers pay to make university education free for everybody. Typically what happens, free for everybody who's admitted to higher education. Because in a country like, say, Brazil, one of my favorite examples that's been studied a lot, you're basically just using general taxpayers' money from sales tax and so forth to pay for the education for the privileged rich kids, because they already got the highest qualifications to enter the national university because they had such good private training before. So it's very inequitable, and it's not the best way to spend the money in many such cases. Overall, for a country like a country in Western Europe or North America, the public higher education, I would summarize this way. And there's a great study by the head of the economics department of Columbia to this effect. Here's what has happened. It has worked well because higher education in those leading countries is extremely efficient, in part because it must compete against the private and against other publics. So Berkeley has to compete against University of Michigan, public. Berkeley has to compete against Stanford to get the best students, faculty, government research grants. It is in fact a competitive market system, even though there's a large public presence. So you can read about that in that nice book by Miguel Urquiola, the head of the economics department at Columbia. It's very good. We've done it well. Higher education is something we've done really quite well. Again, not just because it's public, because it's publicly subsidized to help, encourage the positive externalities, but the public institutions are forced to compete. The private institutions can outcompete them if they're not careful.
All right then. So Peter, I'm really enjoying your thorough analysis of various complicated public policy issues, but unfortunately, I have to go. And Peter, I do believe that you're enjoying the debate.
Oh, why not? This is fun.
You know what's interesting, Peter? So I interview people and then I record the video and send them the video, and they send me an email saying the interview was fun.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm in this business because I love being in this business. Economics is terrific. It's this mixture of hard science and sneaky persuasion.
Yes.
And I love stepping in there and being the myth buster, as you said.
Yes. I do believe that you'll continue to produce more papers and write more books. I'm just unfortunate that Professor Williamson is not in the business of writing again.
He won't right now. That doesn't work for him right now.
Yes, yes. But his
Mhm.
head is still sharp. I
Oh,
interviewed
he
him.
is. Yeah. Have you talked to him?
Yes,
Have
I
you talked
did.
to him? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
he's sharp.
Yeah, that's like, I think this is a big tragedy in economics. Jeffrey Williams not writing.
Yeah, and you probably know the reason why.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
But
sure.
the man wrote until he was 80.
Well, let's see, his last book with me, he was, yes, he was over 80.
Yes.
That's right, the last book, and he's been publishing since then. So in his 80s, yes, he
Yeah,
publishes.
yeah, there is it's always better to work until you're old, and then for whatever reason due to health challenges you cannot write, than to
Yeah,
reach 50 and for others to see that the zenith of your potential was when you were 35.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah,
And one of the career that Jeffrey and I are in is great because as long as your brain is there, you can keep
yeah.
contributing. And by the way, I think this will be the favorable tendency because we know from the demographic data, the health of seniors, those above 60, say, is really improving a lot ever since the 1970s. COVID is an important asterisk footnote, but basically it's really improving. And so you can stay mentally sharp quite late. Oh, speaking of which, one of the best economists writing well into her 90s, Anna Jacobsen Schwartz.
Yes, I remember her.
Yeah, she was great. She was still publishing good stuff with the help of Mike Bardo at age 95, I would say. She was still doing a frontier research.
Yeah, yeah, those people are just amazing. Like
Yep.
when I was interviewing Jeffrey, he was not looking at the papers, but he knew them so well.
Mhm.
He
Yeah.
just I plan to have Hillary at some point. He's also top of the line.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's a pleasure to speak to you, but unfortunately I have to go. So bye.
Okay, Lipton.
All right then.
Thanks very much.
Yes.
Oh, you want to send me, you want to link me up
Yeah, yeah,
to the interview?
you get the link, sir. You get it. All right then. Bye.
Okay. Okay. Ciao.
All right, bye.